Hi everyone, thanks for taking the time to tune in today. The lecture that I'm sharing with you, in my opinion, is arguably the most important lesson that I deliver to our clients and our students. It tackles this concept of heart health. And the way I go about this is through a little bit of anatomy and physiology, but then also the pathophysiology of disease within the heart. And so I look at heart disease, diabetes, and obesity simply because I believe them to be the same disease. They just show up in different ways. They have very similar triggers. These are lifestyle diseases, and so they're behavioral in terms of the things that the way we live our lives and how we act. I also take a dive into depression and addiction, which commonly are associated with these problems as well, with these other diseases. So before you go any further, please take a moment, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications button. Thank you so much. It helps our channel out greatly, and I hope you enjoy what follows. Be well. So this is a healthy vessel, okay? A healthy vessel. And what I mean by that is that anything that carries fluid in it, vessels, okay, is this shape, okay? And the reason that it's this shape is because it's the most efficient. It reduces resistance, okay? And specifically, I use the word resistance, and we use the word resistance because it's actually an electrical term, okay? Because there's actually a polarity that's associated with this. I'll talk about this in a little bit. So we reduce resistance. So the take home is that if I went into your home and I turned your water pump off, and then I changed your plumbing to this configuration, and then I turned your water pump back on, I would blow your water pump up in like 30 seconds, okay? And it's simply because of the amount of resistance that this shape has. So the take home is this: if you get crap in your pipes, well, your heart has to work harder. That's basically what it comes down to. I can't guarantee you more days, but what I can tell you is that the less this has to work, the easier your days are, the better your days are, plain and simple, okay? Now, let's look at this from kind of a mechanical structure, okay? So this was this. So it's a vessel that's collapsed. It's a little exaggerated, but not by much, okay? So the vessel is collapsed. In this case, the vessel is collapsed because of dehydration, okay? Now, one of the reasons that I bring up dehydration in a heart health talk is that everybody that's having a heart attack is dehydrated. Everybody who has diabetes is dehydrated, type 2 diabetes. Everybody who is obese is likely dehydrated, okay? They're not getting adequate water. Now, I'll put this into perspective. So for women, you need about 2.5 liters of water per day, minimum mandatory. For men, it's generally around 3.5 liters of water per day. This is not fizzy water, this is not tea, this is not coffee, it is flat tap water, okay? The thing about carbonated water, it tastes good, but it does not get taken up by the cell like flat water does. So, and the other thing is that if you are not measuring and counting the water that you are drinking throughout the day, there is no way you will get the minimum mandatory, and you actually have to work at it. If you work off of signs and symptoms of thirst, we don't get any signs and symptoms of thirst. We actually get signs and symptoms of dehydration, okay? So this is actually a contributor
to heart disease, diabetes, and obesity, those are arguably the same disorder. They're sugar problems. They're all sugar problems. And stress related. And I will make an argument that stress and sugar are arguably the same thing. Now, dehydration. Let's take a look at this in terms of what happens to the body. So we take fluid volume out of here, okay, in the form of water, because that's mainly what your blood is made up of, is water. So we take the water out, and so Danielle, if we take water away from the blood, what does the blood do? What does it become? More what? Becomes thicker. And then Alex, once it becomes thicker, it's more likely to do what? Do you know? Okay, somebody just said it. Who just said it?
Clot.
Pardon?
Clot.
Clot. It's more likely to clot. Okay? And so it gets thicker, it's more likely to clot. We pull fluid volume out so there's not as much volume, so the vessel starts to collapse. The vessel itself, okay, doesn't get enough hydration, so those cells are incapable of holding their form. And then we increase the resistance because we change the consistency of the blood to make it thicker. Okay? Your heart rate goes up, your respiratory rate goes up, you normally get a sign and symptom, you're like, I'm thirsty. So you start drinking that water, glug, 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 glug. Okay? Start drinking that water. Now the beauty of when you drink water is you get relief pretty quickly. Why? Because you don't have a mucous membrane inside, you have a mucous membrane in your mouth. You do not have an epidermis. Okay, so we have a piece of Gore-Tex on our skin that we call an epidermis. That's our top layer. That's what Gore-Tex was actually developed after, was epidermis. And so we don't have that epidermis, so we're able to pull water through the mucous membrane in the mouth, in the esophagus, all the way down into the stomach. When the water gets into the stomach, absorbents are sprayed into the stomach, and that water gets pulled into the bloodstream pretty quickly as well. And then the excess water that's left over goes into the intestines then pull it into the bloodstream as well, okay? And then down into the colon, into the rectum, etc., okay? And so we can basically get a little bit of relief pretty quickly when we drink water. And then boom, we drink water, heart rate, respiratory rate goes down, we feel some relief, okay? We change the consistency of the blood and we come back up to a healthy vessel. Make sense? Pretty mechanical, pretty straightforward. Okay, now here's the problem. The vessel does the exact same thing in depression. It collapses. And why do we talk about depression in a heart health course? Well, because if you have heart disease, if you have diabetes, and specifically when I talk about diabetes, I'm talking about type 2 diabetes, which is a lifestyle condition, not congenital, and then obesity. And what we know is that depression and physical health, or poor physical health, run side by each. We're not quite sure which one jumps in front of the other, but we know that they have this parallel existence with one another. So you can drink as much water as you want to when you're depressed, but it's not going to do any good. Okay? So what is depression? So, well, 30 years ago when I came into this, they were basically trying to convince us that depression was a chemical imbalance in the brain. The research has never, ever showed that. Ever. Never since day one. Okay? Never. And so, but what we do know about depression today is that it's a loss of connection. Okay? It's a perception issue. It's a perception issue. Yeah, it's a perception issue. How we perceive ourselves to be connected and interacting with the world. Now, how does this work? This is arguably maybe the most important component of all of this to understand in regards to how you interact with the world, and then how you think about the world, and then possibly make yourself sick through those thoughts. So when we interact through the world, Tiffany, do you know how we perceive, what we use to perceive?
our outside world?
Yeah, like how is it that I know you're there?
No, I would say gauging off past experiences or past.
Well, how do I know that you're sitting right now as opposed to sitting over here beside Nate before?
Because you see me.
I see you. And then I may have heard you, so we do it through our what?
Senses.
Our senses, through our 5 senses, okay? Now here, I'm going to blow you away. Your 5 senses, do you know what those actually are?
Taste, smell,
Taste, touch,
Sound.
smell, hear,
sight.
sight, right? Okay. What does that make up? Your what?
Nervous system.
Your peripheral nervous system, okay? So your peripheral nervous system is made up of your 5 senses. So our 5 senses take in information, okay? We then move that information in through our body, okay? We can actually track this through magnetic imagery today. And what we know is that the information comes into our central nervous system. Now, everybody here most likely was taught in school that your central nervous system is your brain and your spine. And while that's true, it's a very dumbed down simplification of what your central nervous system is. And it actually makes it seem as this thing is superior, but it's not. So your 5 senses work. Peripheral nervous system, we pull energy in, and the first place it comes is into your gut, okay? And the reason is that you have a ganglion of neurons, mirror neurons, that are exactly like the mirror neurons in your brain, okay? Except they're on your intestines, and then they're connected to your spinal cord. And then you also have a ganglion of neurons on your heart, and they are connected to your spinal cord as well. So the information comes into your gut first. Interesting. Anybody ever heard it ask you, well, what does your gut tell you? That's not a metaphor. That's actually a true physical, biological reality, okay? And then what the gut does, it's responsible for vessel response. So based off of your perception, your gut takes that information, uses the mirror neurons because they have memory that goes way beyond this existence. And what it does is it perceives fear or love. If you don't like love, you can say relaxed state, okay? But it basically, if it's fear, the vessel gets tighter. If it's relaxed or love, the vessel gets bigger, okay? Now, think about this. The vessels are part of a vacuum system with the heart. So, if the heart's cruising along, pumping, and all of a sudden the pipes get tighter, okay? Nate, what does the heart have to do in response?
Pump harder.
And
Faster.
faster, harder and faster. Exactly. So now the gut says, hey, we have something to be afraid of. Bam! The heart kicks in and the vessel gets tighter, and the heart goes, okay, starts beating faster, harder. Now, the heart needs support in order to do that, okay? Because it's effort. So what it does is it uses its memory, and it reaches over and it reaches out to the endocrine system, and it says, hey, provide me with hormones that mirror what I'm telling you right now. So for instance, fear has a huge range from everything from, I don't like that, to, fucking hate that shit, to, I want to beat you, okay? All right? You've all experienced that full range of fear. Okay, we often don't think of fear like that, where it's like, you want to beat the shit out of somebody or wring their neck, but that's fear. You're actually afraid of their ideas. That's what your body thinks. Okay? Now, if the vessel gets tight, the heart speeds up. It tells the endocrine system, give me some hormones. You get things like adrenaline, you get things like cortisol in order to support that pace, okay? Adrenaline is basically high-test gasoline, and then cortisol is a really poor excuse for nutrition, okay? I'll talk more about that later. So for instance, if you perceive a relaxed state or belonging or love, the vessel gets bigger, the heart rate slows down, and then the heart then communicates with the endocrine system and says, hey, give me hormones that mirror this experience. You get things like oxytocin and serotonin, which actually help you keep your heart rate lower, keep you calm. Serotonin just makes you happy. Oxytocin basically makes you go, I kind of like you. Okay? Oxytocin is the binder. Okay? Now, that information comes into the heart. So it goes outside world, 5 senses, peripheral nervous system, central nervous system, gut, heart, and then a second after it comes into the heart, it comes up to your brain. And based off of your previous experience, your past, you judge the feeling in the present moment. Okay? So depending on your program, 70% of us have a negative program, 30% of us have a positive outlook. Negative program, what does that look like? Somebody gives you a compliment and you're like, oh no thanks, yeah, I'm not that good, whatever. Okay? That's negative programming. Positive programming, somebody gives you a compliment, you go, thank you. Okay? It's called deserving versus undeserving, okay? And so 70% of us believe that we are undeserving of the love that other people give us. And so what's interesting is that we think that through because of the program, and then we're like, I don't deserve to get those types of accolades. I don't deserve to get that type of love. I need to work harder in order to keep doing this, okay? Now, the information is supposed to come up, in, and out. So take the lesson from the circumstance and then let the circumstance go, okay? But unfortunately, we're capable of thinking about things in the past and the future, okay? Because if you're thinking, you're not present. You can't be, okay? Because the brain is either forwards or backwards. It's in the past or it's in the future. And you've all done this where you've had an experience during the day that went unfavorable, or you judged it to be unfavorable. You couldn't find the silver lining or the lesson out of it, and so you started to judge yourself about it. And then what do? You start recreating the whole situation, and then your heart rate starts to match what your brain is thinking. And then the heart reaches out to the endocrine system, gets those stress hormones with it, and then the information comes down to the gut, and then the vessel gets tighter. The problem is that when it happens in real time, that's supposed to happen. But when you think about these things and perseverate over it, this is how we get ourselves sick, because we create hormonal concoctions that are not healthy we toxify our bloodstream is basically what we do. And so ultimately, and then when we're in a stress response and the vessel's tighter, we trap those hormones in the bloodstream. Okay? And so this is basically the biology of health, which is how you think about yourself represents a physical manifestation of who you are. Okay. So depression is a perception. So as I said, you can drink as much water as you want. But for instance, sometimes people say, people are depressed, what do you tell them to do? You should do what? You should, so say it loud. Who said it?
Therapies.
Oh, well, therapies. Awesome. Yeah, no, 100%. I'll support that. What's the low-hanging fruit? What's the cheap stuff?
Exercise.
Exercise. I like that. Okay. So, pardon?
Drink water.
Drink water. Now, healthy diet's helpful. Okay, but exercise. So let me help you understand compensatory versus complementary. So if you have an undeserving script, okay, you don't think very well about yourself. So, and if you choose to exercise to feel good, because that's what we refer to as eustress. So when you first start to exercise, everybody experiences this at some point. You start too quick and you get winded too fast. And then, because your body's stressed and your body goes, what are we running away from? And you're like, oh, nothing. We're actually like, this is good for us. And so the vessel opens up, the blood pressure goes down and the heart rate goes down, and now you can manage the speed. You also promote good hormones with that, okay? The problem is that if you're the more severe your depression, if you stop exercising, now you go back to that old perception. And now the next time you go to exercise, you have to exercise harder. You have to go farther, longer, more intense, okay, in order to get the same desired results. And then this turns into a loop. As I often joke in this valley, we have a tremendous amount of depressed athletes, okay? Because the physical exertion makes us feel good, The problem is we have this underlying condition, and ultimately this is about connection to community, to family, okay? Our environment. It's a relationship, is the easiest way to explain it. And once individuals can rectify that relationship, oftentimes depression just drops off the map. It is said that heart disease, diabetes, obesity, depression all run in families. Absolutely, but it's not genetic. You just pick up the behaviors of your family. So if you live with these folks for the first 18 years of your life, which most of us do, okay, we pick up these behaviors, and they're subconscious patterns that we're unaware of, okay? And the problem is we're so much more like our parents than you think you are, okay? Why? Because it's subconscious. You don't even know it. Okay? So that's what's going on here in regards to depression. The problem is that it causes increase in blood pressure, it causes a decrease in oxygen absorption, it causes a decrease in nutritional uptake, and then ultimately people start seeking events in order to feel better. Whether that's sugar, sugar just makes you feel good. I don't know if anybody ever noticed that, okay? But it doesn't last very long, so you need to eat more sugar in order to keep feeling it, so it's external. Exercise is external. I'm not saying it's not good for you, I'm just saying it's external, okay? But ultimately, we've got to rectify the relationship with ourselves. Okay. Questions, comments about anything up here so far? Okay. Now, I mentioned the vessel can do two things, okay? The vessel can do two things. So the vessel has the capacity to get smaller or get bigger. When it gets smaller, we call this vasoconstrict or vasoconstriction. This is what we call fight or flight. This is a stress response. Now the heart rate goes up, the respiratory rate goes up, the blood pressure goes up, and the O2 saturation and the nutrition uptake goes down. So we get less nutrition and we get less oxygen when we're in a stress response, okay? We also get adrenaline, and we get cortisol. Now, there's more hormones out there. I like to keep this pretty simple in regard, instead of giving you the whole laundry list. So the vessel gets tighter, it becomes less permeable, and it traps everything in it. Okay, let's look at this from a couple of different situations. So all of you experienced this before. You feel this burning in your heart. In your mind, you're like, I'm gonna fucking kill you, right? Okay, good. Like at least at least you own it, right? This is the whole point, okay? So you felt this, And as I like to remind folks, you think about how to kill them, but you feel it right here. Okay? Right? I didn't mean to trigger you.
Oh no, I just sit up and stand up from my back. No, I'm not hiding.
No, I'm just having fun with you. I'm just having fun with you. Okay? So, what goes on is this, is you get adrenaline and cortisol, okay? Adrenaline is basically caffeine, but it's high test, and then cortisol is sugar, okay? Cortisol is unique. So, if you're a type 1 diabetic, if you're a type 1 diabetic, you are incapable of storing sugar in your liver, okay? And so, for most of us that are not type 1 diabetic, when we get off the back on our blood sugar when we haven't eaten enough food, okay, diabetics can't store sugar because they'll secrete cortisol, and the cortisol causes you to secrete sugar from your liver. Well, they don't have any stored sugar, so they pass out. We get hangry, okay? And what's happening is we're getting enough sugar in order to be able to stay awake and conscious, but we're like, rah, 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 rah. And somebody's like, you should eat something. You're like, don't tell me what to do. You're like, no, you really should eat something. I hate when you tell me what to do. It's like, eat this, okay? So cortisol is what we used to refer to as the famine hormone. This is where we would see people in famine, they would constantly have high levels of cortisol so that they could keep secreting sugar from their liver. Now, here's what's wild. Let's take a 10-year-old, let's give him a 2-liter bottle of Mountain Dew. Sounds like fun, right? So what are, Emmy, it's Emmy, right? Emmy, what are the two drugs in Mountain Dew?
Caffeine and sugar.
Caffeine and sugar, okay? So this is what's wild. That kid, this 10-year-old kid, boom, drinks the Mountain Dew, okay? And what does it do? Causes his vessels to get tight, causes the heart rate to go up, and then it causes his heart to trigger the endocrine system and say, hey, magnify this, okay? And so it amplifies the experience. And then what happens is that all of this wears off in like an hour and a half, and the kid's crashed out. And then as he's crashing out, he's like, what does he want? Yeah, except here's the thing about it. He's actually becoming addicted to this. The method that he goes through to get there is irrelevant. We get addicted to our own hormonal concoctions that we create, or we try to deny them. So for instance, the 10-year-old kid that's drinking Mountain Dew jacks him up, but then his hormones jack him up more, so then he turns around and he's like, give me more Mountain Dew. And we're like, oh, you're addicted to the Mountain Dew. And it's like, you're actually addicted to your own drama, which is this response, okay? Because he's running around being like, hey, whoa, what do you want to do? Where are we going to go? What do you want to do, huh? Let's go, let's do something, right? Okay. Now, the other piece to this that's interesting is that, let's say you work in a very high stress environment, okay? Some people love that, okay? But if you can't turn it off at the end of the day, where it's like, I want this to keep going, okay? People can commonly seek out substance in order to mimic this. So the way I like to put this in here is like, take the Wall Street stockbroker, right? All day long, right? Sell, buy, running around like crazy lunatic, right? Talking about make-believe shit, money, right? And ultimately, he's running around on cortisol and adrenaline all day long. And then once the bell rings at the end of the day, it's all over. But he likes that environment. So what does he seek out?
Drinking scotch.
Bingo, exactly. Okay? Yeah, exactly. So start doing a little bit of blow, and now all of a sudden you can mimic the same experience. Okay? So this is addiction. He's addicted to his hormones, but then he seeks out substance that makes his body create more of those hormones. Okay? Now, if you work in a stressful environment that you don't like, and at the end of the day, if you can't turn it off, pardon me, I'm just making an example here. I got nothing wrong with it, but have a drink or two. Why? Because it's a neurotoxin. So if you can't turn off the stress of your day, alcohol is an amazing substance that stops you from feeling stress. The problem is that the long-term effects associated with it are debilitating. So it works. But as I often joke with some friends of mine in the Valley, I'm like, it's interesting. You tell me you don't drink because of stress. And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, when you started doing this 25, 30 years ago, you had one beer at the end of the day and you were fine. And today, you drink a 12-pack. And they're like, yeah, but I'm not drunk. And they're like, I built up a tolerance. But what you build up a tolerance to is this. Okay? And so tolerance has nothing to do with a physical attribute. It's emotional. The more shit you have to deal with, the more you can drink. I used to be living proof of that. I could put anybody under the table with 125 pounds, right? Okay? So that's how this addiction thing works, okay? Now, don't get me wrong, this is helpful if somebody's trying to kill you, if you have a real life threat, because what it does is it shuts your brain off, and it puts all the blood into your arms and legs, and it gives you the capacity to run like hell or to fight like crazy. The problem is that when you're with your partner, you're having an argument, and you're in this state, that's where you are. You would rather go to blows than come up with a good idea of how to solve the problem you're trying to get through. So what's important to recognize is that if you can recognize that you're in a fight or flight response, your decision-making capacity is zero, because you're not getting enough blood to the brain. And you can't make good decisions. If you've ever seen anybody in this state, they perseverate, they hold on to a certain point, and you cannot get them off of it. And then what do we tell people? You should sit down, you should calm down, you should take a few deep breaths. And they're like, don't tell me what to do. Nobody likes to be told what to do. Okay. Questions, comments? Okay, here's a blue sky. So this is vasodilation. This is what we call feed or breed. And this is a relaxed response. Heart rate, down. Respiratory rate, down. Blood pressure, down. O2 and nutritional uptake goes up. So you get more nutrition and you get more oxygen from less effort. Okay? You're going to get things like serotonin in terms of hormone and oxytocin. Okay, let's have some fun here. Let's start with the feed side. Okay? This blows my brains apart every time I talk about it. In the 60s, we started a research study in the Middle East. I shouldn't say we did. There was a research study that began in the Middle East. And specifically, the reason why it was started is because there was an emerging Western lifestyle in the Middle East in the 60s, and they started to see weird health problems showing up at the same time. And they were like, let's come up with some type of a comparison. Like, let's look at some studies. So you have to also wrap your head around the fact that the Middle East in the 60s, like if you were in Iran in the 60s, women were wearing mini skirts and pants. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like that's how much things have changed, okay? And so what they do is they're like, okay, so we've got traditional Muslim customs, and then we have this emerging Western lifestyle. What's everybody doing the same of? Well, they're all still eating the same food. Perfect. Okay, so we have control now. The food is the control. And then we've got two different lifestyles associated with it. What we find out from this study in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and into the early 90s is that People that pray over their food get more nutrition from their food. And again, that was repeated over and over again. It's fascinating because that study has been taken and amplified ever since, meaning there's even more evidence that that's true. So in the Western world, it drove us nuts that this non-physical thing was causing individuals to gain more nutrition. So what we did is we took the study and we said, let's go to McDonald's. And we compared people that were going through the drive-thru to individuals that came inside and ate. And what we found out was that people that came inside and ate were getting more nutrition from the garbage nutritional source of McDonald's food than the people that went through the drive-thru. Why? Because when you're driving and eating, you're doing two things at the same time, and you're not focusing on what you're doing, and you're not breathing properly, and you're stressed. The vessel's tighter, and it traps all of the nutrition, all of the garbage fat into the bloodstream. Okay? And so people don't get it to the cells, it gets stuck in the bloodstream. Whereas the individuals that came inside stopped, slowed down, sat down, and ate. They got their heart rate down. Commonly, they were families or elderly folks. The families needed to get out of the car because their kids were driving them crazy. And then the elderly folks were just like, I've never ate while I'm driving. That seems like a bad idea, right? The take home is this: when you eat, stop, slow down, sit, get your heart rate down. If you want to pray, okay? Because that lowers your blood pressure too. I can show you all the studies that are associated with that. But at the end of the day, get your heart rate down. And then think about this: if you share food with another individual, you create oxytocin and you create a deeper relationship. That's literally why people should be sitting down at the dinner table with friends and family daily. Hopefully for breakfast and dinner, if not all three meals. Okay? So that's the idea. Slow down here. Feed. Now the breed part, we're gonna have a good time. Okay? Because you know what? Nobody's getting jiggy unless vasodilation is happening. Okay? Why? Because men can't get an erection unless they vasodilate, okay? Now, the main reason why I bring that up is simply because in heart disease, a sign and symptom of heart disease is erectile dysfunction, okay? Erectile dysfunction is caused by stress. It is not caused by the aging process, period. Okay? It has nothing to do with anything else, and that is what the data and the literature has been suggesting for decades. Okay? But nobody reads research. Everybody watches the commercials. Okay? Now, there's a bigger piece to this, okay? So let me help you wrap your mind around this, which is ladies, I know you already know this, but you can't orgasm unless you vasodilate. Okay? Now, what's fascinating is that you can still have sex if you're not vasodilating, but it tends to not be a pleasurable experience. That's why the relationship matters so much, because you have to actually trust who you're with in order to be able to have a pleasurable experience. Now, what's whack is that for the first 35 years of life, men are extremely mechanical and visual. Okay? So they don't need much of a relationship. The problem is they need some mentorship in order to understand what's going to happen to them later in life. Okay? So for the first 35 years, it's kind of autonomic, where men see something that they perceptively enjoy, and immediately they're like, I like that. I love that. And it's like, no, you're just stimulated. Okay? Because you haven't developed a relationship yet. And on the other hand, women are extremely relationship-based for the first 35 years. But then here's what happens. After around the age 35, men start to need oxytocin in order to be able to vasodilate, which means that they actually need a connection to somebody else in order to be able to continue to be potent later in life. Men's bodies think we're going to be dead by the time we're 35, so we're like, spread the seed. And then after that, it's kind of like, what do you mean? You weren't even supposed to be around, let alone procreating. And so as I joke with them, I don't joke, discussion I have with a lot of men that I work with is they're like, I got this issue, I'm like, how old are you? They're like, oh, I'm 42. And I'm like, are you in a stable relationship? And they're like, no. And I'm like, so you're playing the field? They're like, well, yeah. And I'm like, doesn't work like that as you get older. Unless you have a serious amount of confidence in yourself, meaning how good is a relationship with yourself, and how much stress do you put under yourself to perform. And so this is what's all going on. So the take home is this. I try to tell young men, hey, figure out the relationship early and figure out the give and take to that, because you're going to need it after the age of 35 in order to continue to be potent. And then ladies, once you turn 35, you tend to be far more selective with men. You also, with your partners in general, as you get older, you all often get far more selective. And then you become more comfortable with the state, and so you're able to vasodilate easier. So it's pretty funny. You have an easier time getting to where you want in the interaction with the relationship, and men have a more difficult point, simply because of the program we were taught. Okay? Stress is the problem. Okay? I like to put this into perspective. I'll give you a real quick one here, which is this. So, ladies, when you're carrying a child and you go into labor, you're vasoconstricting. Okay? You're vasoconstricting like crazy. Why? Because you're putting a basketball through a garden hose, right? And so you need adrenaline to numb your tissue in order to be able to deal with the pain. And then you need cortisol to keep secreting sugar so that you can get some type of nutrition to stay awake for the 12 to 48 hours of labor you're going to be in. Okay, because nobody's feeding you during that time. So you have to feed yourself. Now, before the infant comes out, infants vasodilate, they're hanging out in the water breaks. Before the water breaks, they're just hanging out. They're like, this is the best thing ever. I get oxygen, I don't even have to breathe. I get nutrition, I don't have to eat. I'm warm, I'm comfortable, this is amazing, and I'm floating. And then boom, the water breaks, and it's like, uh-oh, panic sets in. So, mom's in labor over here, and then as soon as the infant is delivered, they flip-flop sides. The infant goes into vasoconstriction, fight or flight. They're cold, wet, hungry, scared. Mom immediately goes into vasodilation. Why? Well, we dump serotonin and oxytocin into your body so that you forget about all of the pain. You'd never have another child if you didn't vasodilate after delivery. And so serotonin just makes you feel good. Oxytocin gets into your bloodstream and binds you to this infant immediately. And then that infant that is screaming their head off and scared, we place them on your chest. You keep them warm, dry, and comfortable, and then they start nursing and they get oxytocin from you through your milk, and you start bonding with them immediately. Okay? And then hopefully dad's in the delivery room, and dad's in fight or flight like crazy at this point, right? And what's crazy is this is that the experience that men have around this is that, boom, we put the infant in dad's hands, and dad goes, ah! He's terrified, right? But then, boom, immediately he has this huge oxytocin and serotonin response around the fear. The fear doesn't go away. It's just that he has this vessel response that creates more space around the fear, and it shows him what to protect, what to love, what's important. And that's the idea. And so we're having these hormonal responses in regards to the relationships we're having with one another. When you're having these in day-to-day life, when you're having these fight or flights, the adrenaline hardens your tissue and the cortisol puts more sugar into your bloodstream than you need. Okay? And it gets difficult to get out. It turns into plaque. When you're having these experiences, ultimately what's going on is that your heart's not working that hard. And you can create more space and have more time and effort. You have more time for people is what it comes down to. Now, these are autonomic responses, meaning we have experiences, and then based off of the experience, our body responds one way or the other on a wide range of this binary response. What's important to realize is that when this occurs, it's autonomic. The trick, though, is this: you have to control your emotions. So what do? Conscious breath. So we say to folks all the time, it's like, you're stressed out. It's like, sit down, calm down, take a big deep breath. The reality of this is that folks that are very well practiced at this have the capacity of forcing this response over top of this. Okay? Cold water immersion is an example of it. Anaerobic exercise is an example of it, where you stress the body so much, but you control the breathing. I joke about it all the time. If you interact with the outdoors at a high level, in terms of a high cardio output, the outdoors teaches you how to deal with the stress, and you learn how to breathe. And so you either learn how to control your emotional container, or you're just an asshole, right? Because this starts off low level, is difficult to deal with, but then it turns into an asshole after 10, 15 years, sometimes faster, okay? Whereas this takes conscious effort, okay? And to put it into perspective, when you're driving and you're screaming at the car in front of you, you're not conscious, you're in your subconscious program over here, okay? And you're stressed. But over here, you're normally completely aware of what's happening around you and you're accepting. Questions, comments, anything?
I have a question.
Please.
You were saying that it traps, when the vasoconstricts, it traps the cortisol and adrenaline in there. So can you untrap it just as easy?
So it's interesting because you can't untrap it. The easiest way the next section I'm going to go into, I think will explain to you better through, you can reverse the process of this, but the reality of it is that when this is occurring in the present moment, the only thing that you can do is remove yourself from the environment and then allow yourself to calm down. Because the more you engage with it, the more it's a loop. The madder and the less tolerant you become.
I just feel like I need to untrap some stuff, and I need to figure out how do I untrap these things.
So it's interesting because, for instance, we trap trauma. We trap trauma over here, okay? And then what we do is we don't process it. So, for instance, I work with individuals around death and loss, okay? And so sometimes people will say to me, I need to be strong for my children. And I'm like, that is horrible. They're like, no, I'm not going to break down in front of my kids. I'm like, no, that's exactly what you should be doing. Because if you don't mirror to them the appropriate response to a death that is near to you, they then pick up that behavior and do the same thing with the emotions. And so you can think about it as a bucket, and you can keep filling this bucket up with all of this negativity. The problem is that if you don't allow it to come out through an emotional response, screaming, yelling, crying, okay, writing, okay, breath work, yoga, okay, if you're not doing those things, the bucket starts getting full, and then when it starts to spill over, we become extremely emotional and difficult to deal with. So how do you untrap this? Slow down, do less, breathe more, eat more nutritious foods, walk barefoot in the grass, interact with the outdoors, interact with other people on a meaningful level. Okay? Does Is there another question out here? Okay. All right. I'm going to pull it all together here. Pull this all together. Okay. It's fascinating because on the stress end, when you're stressed, those hormones make you, they make you want to eat more stress because the sugar makes you feel good for a short period of time. The problem is that it's not good for you in the long game. So back to the vessel. Now, so we've got a vessel, and then we have this stuff that is on the vessel itself. This is plaque, okay? What's plaque? Plaque is fat, from sugar. What's important to recognize is that fat is extremely healthy for you if it's naturally occurring. But if you're eating processed foods, that fat is not helpful for you at all, okay? So the thing that's fascinating about this is that for years, the Heart Association specifically and Red Cross was saying, avoid fat. The problem was that if you were eating whole foods, real food that has fat in it, that was really good for you. And then we started to do this thing called eating lean meat. You should not eat lean meat. You should eat fatty meat. You should also source your food as well, okay? Because for instance, when you're eating GMO-based food, ultimately it's processed, and that processing causes higher levels of sugar and fat associated with the food source. And so we trap that in the bloodstream, we trap the sugar, and then ultimately what ends up happening is we create this fat and it turns into plaque. Now, once this is on here, the vessel can only vasodilate out one side. So this is what we would call partial occlusion, okay? The tissue can also harden from adrenalines, from years of interacting with a high intensity experience. And what it does is that it hardens the tissue and then it stops the vessel from being able to change size. So you don't necessarily have to have plaque. You could just simply have hardening of the arteries. Hardening of the arteries, generally in the medical world, they'll try to tell you this is a function of age. It has nothing to do with age. Your blood pressure should not go up with age. Your blood pressure goes up because you're under too much stress, okay? In order to get rid of this is fascinating. Once you create plaque, so for instance, somebody who's obese generally has a lot of plaque in their system. The problem is that they can't vasodilate when they exercise. So when they exercise, they perceive a stress response. They put more cortisol into their bloodstream and they commonly gain weight. So this is what we call the obesity loop. The only way you can get rid of this is by removing sugar from your diet completely. And then you can force the body to go into ketosis after you remove all the sugar from the bloodstream, meaning you're creating glucose from food as opposed to eating sugar. And so once you remove the sugar from the bloodstream, the body will go into ketosis. It will eat this fat away. I've worked with individuals that are morbidly obese, over more than 100 pounds. And once we get the diet straight, boom, the weight just falls off of them. And it's a function of the body being able to metabolize the fat. It won't do it naturally because it's too difficult. It's too hard. It's too much effort to metabolize it. And so instead it goes for simple sugars that are more readily available if you're eating them. So you have to change the diet completely in order to be able to get rid of this. This is something that Western medicine is beginning to start getting a grip on. We just don't source our food good enough in this country in order for it to be as effective as we would expect it to be. Our food sourcing is completely contaminated because you have GMOs. We still allow pesticides into our organics. Please get food local, buy it farm to table, quit going to the grocery store. We have too many options in this valley. And we have too many beautiful options with individuals that are providing great food source for us. That's the trick to it. Okay, so plaque. So now, if I take the heart, and I'm going to make a little circulatory system here, okay? Now, your heart pumps blood to your entire body, to every cell, and it delivers oxygen and nutrition to it. But the heart muscle itself needs oxygen and nutrition as well, so it has a mini circulatory system. Now, if I take this circulatory system of the heart, and let's put in an occlusion into it. So this represents coronary heart disease, okay? Now, under normal situations, the heart is capable of getting the blood through that occlusion. Although, when we get a stress response, so this could be too much physical activity, it could be too much heat, could be too much cold, could be the loss of a loved one, could be a number of different things that causes stress and anxiety. And so what happens is that this vessel tightens up and this vessel gets even smaller. So the occlusion with a blockage or a narrowing of the artery. So we get the stress response, the heart rate goes up, the respiratory rate goes up, and now we get pressure on this side, but we don't get any more benefit out of it because of this narrowing. So we end up with high BP on this side, and we end up with low O2 on this side. If this goes on long enough, cells in the heart begin to die. Once the cells in the heart begin to die, this is a heart attack. Now, they are not dead. On the contrary, they have chest pain, and they have difficulty breathing. Now, everybody jumps on me here and they're like, women have different signs and symptoms. I'm like, no, they don't. Men just ignore those signs and symptoms because we're taught to ignore how we feel. Men die disproportionately of heart attacks. Women generally survive them. Why? Because they have low-level signs and symptoms like, you know, it feels like I got this little tennis ball here. I've been trying to drink a ton of water and I can't get it to move. And I've been a little clammy, I had a bad night's sleep, and I just feel off. And they go to the hospital. And then we basically find the narrowing, and we're like, hey, you're on the verge of a heart attack. Guys wake up and they're like, they're like, you know, I feel like shit. Give me a cup of coffee, give me a donut. I gotta go to work. I have to support everything. I'm not even kidding you. And so men disproportionately have heart attacks in front of people at work. At work. Okay? The other thing is that we see more heart attacks in this valley in the summertime simply because more people travel in the summertime. People are coming from lower elevations. They're coming from more humid areas. They're not used to how dry it is. And then they exert themselves as if they do this stuff all the time. And then they have underlying conditions that they may or may not be aware of. And so we see a lot more heart attacks in the summertime than we do in the winter. People are generally fitter that travel in the wintertime because it's more difficult to travel. Okay? They have chest pain because the cells in the heart are dying. They have difficulty breathing because of the low O2. Now, anytime we experience any of the low-level symptoms that women commonly present and get treated for, or whether we see the full-blown heart attack, and the problem is that the severity of this goes from, you know, I'm having this like pressure, and it's weird, like, yeah, it's like, it's not like taking my breath away, so that's like a low-level heart attack, all the way up to where people will be coughing, clenching their chest, and having extreme pain and difficulty catching their breath. Any range of those signs and symptoms, the treatment is call 911, okay? Now, The next thing I want you to do is this. You're going to check for no aspirin allergies. If there are no aspirin allergies, you are going to administer 4 chewable baby aspirin. Okay? 4 chewable baby aspirin. This is the equivalent to 1 adult dose of aspirin. But we want chewable. Why? Because when you chew it, 1, it tastes good. Okay? And then 2, remember the hydration thing? Well, you have a mucous membrane inside your mouth, so you can pull that aspirin sublingual or through the mucous membrane into the bloodstream quite quickly. And ultimately what aspirin does is it slickens the blood, it reduces the clotting mechanism. So it reduces the pressure, increases the flow, and increases the amount of oxygen that the individual is going to get. Okay? Aspirin saves lives. Okay? So you should have baby aspirin, bare chewable baby aspirin. Do not have somebody chewing an adult aspirin. It tastes like battery acid. Okay? They're also going to be very thirsty. Try to withstand giving them water. If you need to satiate their mouth, generally what we do is, like in the backcountry, I would just take like a piece of clothing and dip it in water and let them suck on it so that they can wet their whistle. In the pre-hospital, in the ambulance, we give them a sponge to suck on. Don't let people drink water. They'll chug the whole thing. They're going into surgery, and we don't want to have to pump their stomach because it takes more time. So try to hold off on any fluids. Now, the next thing on this treatment is calm them down. How do you calm them down? You have to give them a reason for what they're feeling. So you tell them very straightforward, you're having a heart attack. And we're calling 911, and it appears you're having a cardiac event, and we're going to take as best care of you as we can. When you give people a reason for how they're feeling, they generally calm down. Even in the most craziest situation that seems nuts. And you're like, you're going to tell them they have a heart attack? Like, yeah, because most people are in denial about their heart disease, about the fact that they are sick. And then you're going to coach their breathing. And what you're going to do is with them, you're going to inhale through your mouth. You're going to inhale through your nose. You're going to pause. 1, 2, and then you're going to exhale through your mouth longer than you just inhaled. So it's you're going to do that with them. In the last 32 years that I've been involved in emergency services, if there hasn't been a loved one on scene, every individual I've ever been with that's been having a heart attack says this to me: "Can I hold your hand?" And I'm like, absolutely. A couple of things to recognize. 1, they realize they're dying, and they don't want to die alone. The other thing is appropriate physical touch lowers your blood pressure. Okay, and they may not intuitively know that their blood pressure is going to drop, but they intuitively know that they don't want to be alone, and they also want to be in physical contact with somebody else. This is the power of healing hands. Barry.
Does that go back to like the fight or flight of the central nervous system, or the peripheral kind of helps, like just like touching somebody, even in here with like Pilates?
Yes.
You can see when you like actually tactile, like get your hands on people, they like inherently calm down.
Indeed. So this is intentional touch that is focused, and the more intention you put into what it is that you're doing, the more your nervous system interacts with their nervous system and calms them down. I've seen chiropractors who are masters of this, and they'll walk up to individuals and set a single finger on their back and they'll get an adjustment out of it. Now, there's only a few magis like that in the world, but like this is an example of how extreme human touch can get. But this is also how convoluted it can get, because with inappropriate touch, we go into fight or flight. And so how we're conditioned to touch is very, very important, because a lot of people, like for instance, growing up, you couldn't hug my father. Because that was just things that you did not do. Men did not touch one another. And so that was like literally a program that a lot of us in my family had to break as we got older, where it was like, I actually like want to hug my brother, like, and so on. So that's the intentionality of touch. Okay. Questions, comments, anything?
I have a question. I feel like a heart attack can be misconstrued as so many different things. It could be indigestion, it could be acid reflux, it could be you eat too much, it could be so many different things. So, like, you're saying it can manifest its way in so many different ways. I know my father had one years ago, and he just had really bad stomach ache and ended up staying home and didn't think it was anything, and then found out later what it was. So I feel like it's kind of ambiguous where you start this whole process.
So a couple of things.
Okay.
Here's what's wild. If you're over 50, if you're a man over 50, and if you're a woman over 60, and if you start presenting any type of signs and symptoms congruent with difficulty breathing or chest pain, immediately I'm gonna assume it's a heart attack. Okay? Always, just because of the age profile. There's a couple of things that are goofy about this, because so for instance, if you have diabetes or obesity and you're 35, you can have a heart attack. And again, type 2 diabetes, okay? And so those things generally, the physical profile follows with this. The other piece of it is that until we know otherwise, I would generally treat somebody to the fullest extent, where it's like, and if they calm down, like for instance, let's just say somebody's having a severe panic or anxiety attack. We call the ambulance in. We treat them with aspirin. Like, we go through the whole protocol. They come here, they'll put a cardiac monitor on them, and they'll go, you're not having a heart attack. And then they'll say, do you want to come into the hospital? And it's like, no, I'm fine. And then it doesn't cost anybody a dime. And so the problem that we run into is that men will commonly have these like low-level heart attacks that they never get treated, and then they have these massive ones, and they don't pay attention to them, and they either arrest, potentially get resuscitated, or get killed by them. So this is the difficulty, the reality of it all. And then the other piece of it is that post-COVID, and I can give you piles of research on this, where it's basically what we know is we know individuals are having heart attacks at younger ages now. And if this continues to go on the trend that it's on based off of research and data, we have a problem on our hands in 5 years. And so there's a lot of issues with this. So yes, it can mimic and mirror other things. But I can tell you this, I had a 72-year-old woman one time, and she was complaining of indigestion and a slight little bit of pressure. And she was laughing and having a good time with me, and I was like, you're having a heart attack. And she looked at me and she goes, honey, you are so sweet. And I looked at her and I said, you're having a heart attack. And the family, because we're conditioned, the family, like, her state was pretty good. The family decided, they were like, we're gonna self-transport her. They did, they got her into the hospital, boom, get her in there, get her on monitor immediately. It's like, you're having a heart attack. You have an occlusion, So that's the difficulty with this. Here's the reality. Prior to World War II, we didn't have heart attacks. We didn't have heart disease. I mean, occasionally, but not like we do now. 52% of the population right now has heart disease. 52% of the population is obese. 54% of the population has heart disease. And as much as 60% of the population is pre-diabetic, diabetic, or pre-diabetic, diabetic, or undiagnosed diabetic. 60% of the population. So as I like to remind folks, you need to leave Jackson every once in a while in order to be able to see what's going on, because this is not representative of reality. This is representative of the most whacked out creation ever. This is total make-believe land. Total make-believe land. And then the reality of it is we see weird stress, depression disorders, substance abuse disorders associated with this town because of economic disparity. Which, interestingly enough, if it correlates with the current research, we should, and with what's going on around COVID, we'll probably start seeing younger people having heart attacks here. But time to tell.
What's the time frame? It can range, right?
It ranges. It's huge. That's the whole thing. I've seen individuals who are having low-level heart attacks where they're literally like, this is so weird, and they'll just slump in their chair and go completely unresponsive. I've also seen individuals rolling on the floor in pain, clutching their chest, and then they literally hang on, and we're able to stabilize them and treat them, and they survive. So it's all over the map. It really has a lot to do with individual profiles around anxiety, because the more anxious you become, the faster you die. And then sometimes people are able to compensate, their body's able to compensate real well until it doesn't, and then they just fall off the edge.
But we're talking days, not weeks or months.
No, but like to put it into perspective, so this is what's so these are like wild studies where it's like monks in Tibet or in Nepal. We've studied them late in age, and they'll have heart attacks, but it's because of age, not because of their lifestyle. And what's fascinating is the condition will come on, and they start meditating and breathing, and they'll do that for weeks, sometimes months, while they're having the heart attack, and they just slow the process down because they don't have an anxiety profile with it. So this is like just showing you just the different ways that we perceive death and fear in different cultures. All right.
I have a,
Sure.
how true is the symptom of that if you're having a heart attack, one of your arms will hurt?
So sometimes you will get radiating pain down the left arm. The chest pain and the difficulty breathing is primary, and then the radiating pain down the arm tends to be a very late sign. And it often radiates up into the neck as well. But it's on the left side. It's because the heart is just over on the left side a little bit, and so it radiates the pain out to this side of the body. It's neurological. Okay. All right. Everybody want a donut? Okay. Take 5 minutes. Run to the bathroom.